Good morning and welcome to Haventree Parent Podcast, where we get a chance to talk about something that's important to us and to you before our kids wake up.
Today, we are going to talk about the psychological and emotional impacts of childhood cancer on the little tiny warriors themselves.
All right, so like you said, we're going to talk about the psychological impact on cancer children and just how they have to face a lot and process that.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about I can't imagine getting a cancer diagnosis as an adult, right? And what that is like then for kids. I'm going to start off with the boring stuff, talk about a little bit of research. So the symptoms of cancer itself and the treatment can have serious social and emotional consequences for kids. Some of these things can include negative perception of self-appearance, as well as symptoms related to academic, social, and psychological impairment, low self-esteem, and symptoms of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And you think about just some of the very basic symptoms or things that happen for kids with cancer related to the loss of hair. Steroids cause crazy amounts of weight gain. When I look back at pictures of Ken's when she was on steroids, it doesn't even look like the same kid. I don't recognize her in some of those pictures. Different kinds of cancer that impact different parts of the body may result in, having an eye removed, having a amputation, all sorts of different things like that can happen. We see lots of kiddos in our oncology floor that have huge scars, big, awful looking Frankenstein scars. They're not cute little scars. They're big incisions due to the nature of the type of cancer that they have. So just the impact of self-esteem, self-image could be huge. And we weren't really sure what that was going to be like for Kenzie because she was 2 when she was diagnosed. So we didn't really talk about the hair loss a whole lot until it happened. But, now when she sees pictures of herself when she was bald, she'll I was doing something on Facebook or something. And a picture of her, it was like a memory or something, came up where she didn't have hair, and she was like, "Why are you looking at that? Get rid of that." And she had a very immediate and strong negative reaction to seeing a picture of her when she was bald. And she's 4 now. And so it was something that she has strong feelings about, even though, our response, I think I mentioned it in a previous video, but so the thing with a hair loss is there's a couple of things. One is when Kenzie had hair loss, at first it was very patchy and weird. And so she just lost all of the hair on one spot. And so she had this long, past her shoulders hair, and then just this spot where it was thin and patchy and barely there. So we ended up getting a very cute, short, pixie-ish haircut to kind of mask the bald spot.
Sure, and just get prepared for being shorter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then...
Or gone.
And then 8 days after Obi was born, it fell out all at once. It was literally that day, she was like, "My head is itchy." And anytime you would touch her, a handful of hair. And it was just that by the end of that day, it was gone. And it was just less than 24 hours, and it was a very unexpected and sudden, she had been losing hair. She had, we had seen some of it, but it just all at once was gone. And
right.
That was
and I
that.
think it was that weekend we had just gone out and done family pictures.
Yeah.
And we came home and you took the
the
thing
next,
off.
literally the next day.
You took the headband off and half of her hair came with it. And you were we're going to go sit upstairs. I'm just going to brush it off.
Yeah. And so now Kenzie always says remember that day that you pulled all my hair out? That is not
Mom
what
did it. It was Mom.
Is not what happened.
Oh
But I
my
did. It
goodness.
was kind of like, she kept complaining that her head was itchy. And so finally I was like, you know what? Why don't we just go upstairs? We can watch a show and I'll just, massage, rub your head. And it was just like, it just all came out like that day.
I probably blocked it out like the first day that first day, like right.
Yeah.
I probably came up
And it
and
was
you were
so
probably like,
weird.
look, here's all your hair. And I was probably like, I don't have this memory, but
Yeah.
because I was probably, I don't know, just so shocked by it. But
Yeah. So Kenzie's memory is I pulled all her hair out. Great.
I remember that was the day that happened. I don't remember seeing her for the first time bald. I remember like her being bald, but I don't remember the first time I saw her.
But it
bald.
was so soft. Like we all loved just like how soft her head was, and like even the other kids would just like pet her as they walked by, and it got to the point where she's like, "Don't touch me," like, and it just
probably why she doesn't like those pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, they would touch me all the time.
Don't touch me, and I'm not a dog, and so even though it was something that we did in like in an affectionate way, like I just love, your little
Like
head.
I said in the first episode of this,
We call
she's
her-
little commander. So don't
we'd
touch.
say like, I just love your little noggin, Kenzie. It's so sweet, and and she'd be like, and so she did have an opinion about that,
Right.
and so that was kind of like one of those things that like lots of kids have different reactions, but with toddlers, it's kind of hard to know like what that's going to be like. And so that was one of those that we had to, figure out how to be respectful of her body, her opinion, and be sensitive to that. 'Cause she did, have an opinion. So kids with cancer have short and long-term, psychological effects. Like I said, social, emotional, behavioral difficulties. They can become withdrawn. They can have long-term issues with somatic complaints or just random symptoms that they're feeling or experiencing. And academic difficulties. One of the other big things that can happen is chemo brain.
Which I think is one thing that I never really understood. I think I always heard it mentioned, and seeing it is a weird experience.
Yeah.
She'll be thinking about something, and she'll just be wanting to talk about like a story or a rhyme or whatever she's heard, or a song, and she'll be like, "What's the word for this thing?" And
Yeah.
it's like, "That's a book," and it's like,
Right.
you wouldn't think like that's what I don't know if you want to relate it to chemo brain or not. It might not entirely be, but. It was definitely something that she should have known the name of, and it was just like for whatever reason she had a gap, and it was like,
Yeah.
this must be it. This must be what.
Yeah.
Or at least for her at 3, I don't know because I think
There also have been times where like she'll alternate words. So like instead of she kept calling like a blanket a napkin, and she kept saying like, I need some of that napkin, and I was like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And so some of those things where like it was related in some way, like it wasn't like that apple, like I understand, napkin and blanket are kind of similar in that they're both like, one's a large flat covering, one's a very small flat covering, I guess,
Sure.
but like, so some of those things where she would like, have word swaps that didn't make sense. A lot of kids need to have various therapies, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. And part of that is due to the actual treatment itself and some of the impacts on the brain. And some of that's also just due to the isolation. In Kenzie's case, because we have lots of kids that are close in age, that's been a very protective factor for Kenzie. And so even though as a family we've been very isolated from others, she still has had lots of near peer interaction that has kind of kept her sharp on some things that otherwise she would likely be well behind in.
No, definitely. And that's always been, I don't know, good to see from her aspect of just like wanting to be able to go out and play, even though you knew she felt horrible or you saw the pain in her, back from her back surgery for her lumbar puncture, but then she would still be like, oh, they're playing this. I really want to go do that.
Yeah.
And she would get up and go out and do that. We wouldn't stop her from that. I mean, we would say, guys, no wrestling today. She has her
let's be
port
gentle.
access. Yeah, she still has her tube plugged into her chest. So don't wrestle today.
Yeah.
But you can still go play dolls and Barbies and whatever else, and do whatever other activities that they were trying to do.
Yeah.
And we would just monitor like the rough housing and say like,
Yeah.
let's not throw her over the couch today and land on the pillow pile. Let's do other things that are fun.
Let's do Play-Doh or painting
Yeah,
today instead
let's
of
do
wrestling.
Disney karaoke day or whatever, where
Yeah.
we can be silly and goofy, but not landing on each other in a pillow.
Yeah. And that has, I mean, in many ways, we've been told several times that Kenzie is kind of the anomaly, that we've gone through, so much of treatment without needing a lot of those interventions. But a lot of it is just due to the fact that she still has, other kids to play with that are close in age, that keep her growing and developing on a pretty appropriate track. And part of it is just Kenzie herself too. I think that she's just an amazing little thing,
Yeah. Well, and the fun thing for me is that when she comes home and she's like, I got my port off, Dad, or I don't have my button on. I can wrestle today.
Yeah.
And, and that's what after dinner, I think usually during the winter months, we were always like wrestling around, after dinner time or whatever. And that's just our rough house time.
Yeah.
Like I said, throwing them into the pillows and having fun when her port isn't accessed. And so that's always her thing now is like, I don't have the tube on. Let's go wrestle. So,
yeah. And I think, that is one of the good ways that we've managed some of that is that we talk about so getting the port accessed is pretty traumatic and difficult. She does very well with it, but stuff still happens. Sometimes she has to get multiple pokes, and getting a poke in the chest, is kind of scary anyway.
Well, there's
she's
still
very
nerves over top of it.
Yeah,
So.
she's very small, and so even if she looks away, she can kind of see the giant needle coming at her, and it just is I think just innate survival instincts that she's having to kind of override to hold still as a needle comes at her chest all the time. But even more difficult is getting the port removed, or the access de-accessed. So they have the actual access, the needle goes in, and then there's a bazillion and three tape, sticky adhesive situations that they have to put on over it so that it stays, occlusive or sterile or whatever, so nothing gets in it. And Kenzie has very sensitive skin. She's developed sensitivities to most kinds of adhesive. And so it is very painful for her to have all of that removed. For a while, every time she would get it removed, it would bleed and be red for days after. And there are some things that we've done that have helped that some, but it is still, I think excessively painful. And then the other thing that sort of goes along with that is because she's so small, that dressing that goes on it is literally half of her chest, that tape goes up to her neck, it goes into her armpit, it goes down midway down her abdomen, and 2/3 of the way across. So you're talking about having something that would be 18 inches tall and 12 inches wide, for an adult, of a sticky sheet that's then being ripped off all at once. And so it is something that's very traumatic. She gets very angry and cries and screams every time. And it is worse than the accessing. It is not fun.
Yeah. Accessing is already a battle but probably mostly because she knows that eventually she's gonna have to be de-accessed.
And the de-accessing is what's bad.
Yeah.
And so we talk about when we go home, when you don't have your button on, we're allowed to wrestle. When we go home and you don't have your button on, we can swim. There's lots of things about getting your button off that are good.
Well, and even swimming is sometimes controversial for some people because
it depends.
You have to know the levels of the chemicals in the pool and make sure everything's
yeah,
safe. So
taken care of properly.
Yeah.
But so for us, it's we talk about the benefits, and then the other part of that is there's a couple of things. One is, I ask her every time, do you want the nurse to take it off slow, or do you want the nurse to take it off fast? Do you want the nurse to use the wet sticks? There's they have this, it's called Detach-All usually, that they put, and it helps to remove the adhesive more gently. or not? Do you want to help her, or, do you want her to do it by herself? And so giving her those choices, a lot of times the answer is, I just don't want her to do it at all. Right.
No.
But allowing her those choices does help. And then I think the other part of that is a lot of times she will cry when it's being removed. And then once it's off and out, she will like yell and scream and be mad. And, honestly, I have kind of always told her like, hey, it is okay to be mad. And I'll give her like 2 minutes usually to like growl and yell and just be angry. And she does, like, once it's off, she gets really angry. And then, I just kind of say like, hey, I understand that you're angry. I understand that it hurts, and that it's not fun, and I'm sorry. But it is okay. We are done now. So it is time to start calming down. Do you want a hug, or do you want to just take a couple deep breaths? What do you want to do? But it is time now to kind of start getting control of our emotions again. And some days that works better than others. Some days she continues to growl and yell for a couple more minutes. And then she settles, and then she's okay, but I think she's little, and she doesn't understand. And there are days that I feel angry that she has to go through this too. Right. And, so I think verbalizing, like, it's okay to be angry. I understand that this is the thing that you do not like the most, and I'm sorry. I know that you don't like it. But in a minute, it's going to be time to like get our shoes on so we can go. And then, a lot of times she's still like, even once she's done yelling at us, then it sort of is like, she still is kind of like sullen while we like get her shoes on and get dressed and packed up to go. But then like by the time we're leaving, she's okay, and she's like, are we going to get lunch on the way home? Like, what are we going to do now? So, giving that time to her, or to your kiddo to just like be allowed to feel angry or hurt or sad or whatever, is really important. And I think it validates their emotions and allows them to experience them, but also, does that while still maintaining like respect, or like, like there have been a couple of times where she's like said like, I hate you to some of the nurses, or like, I don't want you to be my nurse anymore, like different, whatever.
Oh, and I was going to say, that's where the next point on our list for this topic is, the results vary because every other month she's either on or off of steroids. And when you're 3 and on steroids, there's a lot of just emotion that gets ramped up from that. So, and in addition to chemo and just the other medications, like steroids has probably been the one that we were most warned about as far as like anger issues, and how to deal with that and be prepared for those outbursts, and recognize that it's not truly her, that it's the steroids through her kind of thing. And it's hard to see a toddler on steroids.
It's hard too, because it just feels like, there's the possibility that you might lose your kid anyway. And then this kid that you're dealing with right now doesn't feel like your kid either.
Oh, and it's just mad at the world at that point.
And so it is difficult. One of the things we've always said though, is like, it's okay to be angry, but it is not okay to speak that way, or it's not okay to smack your sibling, or it's not okay to, fill in the blank. And so to say, like, what? I understand that you're angry, and that's okay. You're allowed to be angry. I would be angry too, but you cannot slap someone else while you're angry, or whatever it is. And so just kind of offering like, because I think even as adults, like I am angry, and if somebody tried to discipline me or like chastise me for being angry, I would want to smack them, right? Like, and so it's not fair for us to try to dissuade or discourage our kids from being angry or feeling those things. But it is important that we teach them in the midst of feeling angry. Like, this is okay to do. This is not okay to do, you know?
Well, and the other thing is that the anger just increases as she stays on the steroids. So like she'd have 5 days of steroids and then she'd have like 2 weeks off or something.
Yeah.
And by the 5th day was the angriest because with the steroids, she was getting like next to zero sleep. So it was like she'd be up until midnight and, come
Up again at like 3 a.m.
Right.
Yeah.
And then up again early in the morning. And it was like she'd come into our room and be like, Dad, I want to go down. I'm hungry. And then food was the next thing. So it was like we had to keep her well stocked on chips and salsa from Chipotle.
Oh my goodness.
Or, name your whatever interest that she would like, Pringles or other things. And it was like, at that time, like I would just go downstairs with her and, try to give her, a few hot dogs or like I said, had some chips or something. And just, I don't know, try to give her something for that hunger.
Yeah.
And I can look back and appreciate those evenings, but I know that was
difficult
because of the steroids, and it was just something we had to deal with. So I think you can ask any cancer patient how much food they've had to go through for their
steroids.
For their kids. So for the steroids.
Behaviorally, another issue that we saw for a long time was sleep disturbance issues. Where Kenzie, in the hospital, actually, Kenzie slept pretty well, typically, which is something that a lot of kids struggle with. In the hospital, though, Kenzie typically slept like the dead, and, the nurses would say, like, do you want us to not do things or do certain things? And I was like, she probably will sleep regardless of what you do. When she was younger, she was still wearing a pull-up at night. So it was like, so a lot of times they would pump her full of fluid when she was getting certain chemos, because the chemo is so toxic to the kidneys that they gave her crazy amounts of fluid to protect her kidneys. And so she would be going through a pull-up every half hour to hour. I mean, like crazy loaded, peeing constantly sorts of situations. And so we were like, yeah, go for it. Like if you want to come in every 30 minutes and put a new pull-up on her, like she won't wake up. So in the hospital, she did tend to sleep pretty well, despite
there was maybe 2 or 3 nights where they didn't get to our room in time. And
and Josh would wake up soaked because he would sleep with her a lot.
Yeah. I tried to share her hospital bed. We had the couch and you slept on that and I was on there with her because she was so tiny. There was enough room. And I think I woke up twice and was just soaked because there was something else going on elsewhere and they didn't make it to our room before her diaper was full. Not that it was, I could have also changed her diaper and checked on it too, but
we also needed sleep in the hospital because we did not sleep well. Even though Kenzie slept well in the hospital, we did not sleep well.
You could try to, make sure you're changing it, but there's that point where you didn't.
So then one night, speaking just of waking up, Josh woke up often covered in pee. I woke up once,
twice.
Well, it was twice in one night, covered in blood, because Ken's would get really low platelets and her nose would just bleed like a faucet. And I just remember waking up and she had scooted over, so she was on my pillow, and my whole my face, my hair, my shirt, my pillow were just soaked in blood. And it was the most distressing thing to wake up just covered in blood. And she did it twice that night to me, and it was awful. But Kenzie usually, so back to the point of sleeping though, a lot of kids do struggle with sleep in the hospital. And sleep is really important for healing, it's really important for the body. So she slept pretty well in the hospital, but we went through several months where she had a really hard time sleeping. Some of the time it was due to steroids. But then she also slept in our bed pretty much every night for a very long time. Or she would get up multiple times at night, or she couldn't go to sleep unless I laid down with her. And then, I would wake up and she would, a lot of times wake up and end up following me to my bed or whatever the case may be. And so it did, just take some time, where there were times where she woke up in the hospital and somebody was doing something, whether that was checking a blood pressure or taking blood from the port or whatever the case may be. And so, for a while, she needed that security of having us to sleep with her. And we, did that. There were days that it was hard. Then when we had Obi was newborn, then I wasn't getting a whole lot of sleep at night anyway. And then she would come in at night when I would finally get Obi to sleep, and she would wake him up climbing into our bed. And so we went through a period where I was getting no sleep, so there was some struggle with that too. That was difficult. Lots of kids have night terrors, and rightfully so after all the stuff that they've done and gone through. And so, we experienced a very mild case of sleep issues, but it is kind of another area that's very common in kids.
Yeah.
What other thoughts did you have or want to talk about?
Oh, I was looking at the list here real quick, trying to see if there's anything else. We hit chemo brain, steroids, hair loss, sleeping, anxiety. We sort of
we've talked about
throughout.
So kind of some different issues.
I don't think there's much else to say.
Well, in that case, I'm sure we'll talk more about other things we think of later. But, I think at the end of the day, one of the most important things you can do is be there for your kid. And, if your kid needs that support or that therapy, like we talked about, advocate for that. Not all teams are as proactive in some of that. And so it certainly is better to, be pushing for that ahead of time. And then similarly, understanding and recognizing that kids are still doing a lot of growing and learning, and making ideas and thoughts and opinions of the world around them. And so a lot of the stuff that they go through during cancer treatment does play a formative role into that. And so as much as you can be thinking ahead or doing counseling if they're an older kid or whatever the case may be, to support them in that is really important and beneficial. And that if your kid is experiencing some of those things, that you're not alone in that, and that there are resources out there to support you.
Right. So subscribe, follow, because we're going to support you with all of our encouragement, and comment and share this with whoever it would benefit. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.